I was standing in the paint aisle at Home Depot, holding two sample cards like they actually mattered when my phone rang. One was called Morning Sky, the other was Soft Harbor. Pale blue, both of them. I remember staring at those little rectangles under the fluorescent lights, trying to imagine which one would look better in a nursery. Funny thing is, I'd spent most of my life making decisions worth millions of dollars without blinking. Contracts, payroll, expansion deals. But there I was at 52 years old, completely frozen over paint colors for a room that suddenly felt more important than my entire company. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Unknown number. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but we'd been waiting 9 years for this baby. Doctors' fertility clinics, injections, failed rounds of IVF. After enough disappointment, every unknown number starts feeling important. So I answered. Hello, this is Daniel Mercer. There was a short pause. Then a woman's voice. Mrs. Mercer, I'm just calling to go over your recovery instructions after the procedure. I frowned immediately. I think you've got the wrong number. Another pause, papers shuffling. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. This number is listed as the primary contact on the insurance account. Something cold moved through my chest. What procedure? Silence. The woman suddenly sounded nervous. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. What procedure? Her voice lowered. The pregnancy termination procedure from Tuesday. I don't remember dropping the paint cards. I remember the sound they made hitting the concrete floor, though. Tiny sound, meaningless sound. But for some reason, it stuck in my head. Around me, people kept shopping. A couple argued about ceiling fans 2 aisles over. Some kid was begging his grandfather for candy near checkout. Life just kept moving. Meanwhile, my brain had completely stopped working. There's a mistake, I said. The nurse apologized again and ended the call. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes. I honestly don't know. Then I walked out into the Texas heat holding nothing but my truck keys. Plano traffic was thick that afternoon. Typical North Texas mess. Construction cones everywhere. People cutting each other off on Preston Road like they were qualifying for NASCAR. I barely noticed any of it. I kept hearing the same sentence over and over. Pregnancy termination procedure from Tuesday. Rachel had texted me Tuesday afternoon asking if I wanted sushi for dinner. That memory hit me so hard I had to pull into a gas station parking lot because my hands were shaking too badly to drive. I called her immediately. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I sat there staring through the windshield at a guy filling up his Ford F-150 like the entire world had become unreal. Then I drove to the clinic. The whole way there, I kept convincing myself it had to be wrong. Maybe they mixed up charts. Maybe it was another Rachel Mercer. Maybe. But deep down, I already knew. Because once the shock settled a little, all these small moments from the last few months started lining up in my head. Rachel avoiding conversations about baby names. Rachel checking work emails during doctor appointments. Rachel suddenly talking nonstop about becoming vice president before 42. Things I ignored because I loved her. Or maybe because I was scared to look too closely. When I got to the clinic, she was already outside waiting for me. That told me everything. She stood near the entrance in a cream-colored blazer, arms folded tight against herself. Her face looked pale under the afternoon sun. For a second, I still wanted her to tell me there'd been some misunderstanding. Instead, she looked at me and quietly said, Daniel. That was it. No denial. No confusion. Just my name. I remember laughing once. Not because anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh your body makes when reality breaks faster than your emotions can catch up. You did it, I asked. She looked away toward the parking lot. I didn't know how to tell you. I felt something heavy settle into my stomach. When? Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning. I'd been in Fort Worth Tuesday morning, closing a logistics contract worth almost $2 million. I'd kissed my wife goodbye before leaving. I'd told her I loved her. And while I was sitting in some glass conference room talking software integrations and distribution networks, she was ending our pregnancy without even calling me. I'm 41, Daniel, she said suddenly, her voice cracking. Do you understand what happens to women in corporate leadership at my age? This was my shot. I just stared at her. She wiped at her eyes quickly. You have your company, your legacy. You built something already. I've spent 10 years trying to get this promotion. If I disappeared for maternity leave now, You terminated our baby for a management title. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. Her face tightened. You think this was easy for me? You think I haven't been terrified I finally have a chance to become VP? Women don't get endless opportunities in my industry. I noticed she kept saying not we, not our child. Just her career, her future, her opportunity. And somehow that hurt worse than the procedure itself. Because suddenly I understood something I should have understood years ago. We hadn't been grieving infertility together. We'd been surviving separate lives under the same roof. I leaned against my truck because my knees suddenly felt weak. 9 years. 9 years of trying. I remembered assembling a crib one Christmas after our second IVF attempt because Rachel said she wanted hope in the house. I remembered sitting beside her hospital bed after her miscarriage in 2019. I remembered pretending not to notice when she cried in the shower so she could have privacy. All those years I thought we were carrying the same pain. Maybe we weren't. A long silence settled between us. Cars moved in and out of the parking lot behind her. A woman walked past holding paperwork and iced coffee. Normal life. Rachel finally spoke again. I didn't do this to hurt you. That was the first moment I actually believed our marriage might be over. Not because she ended the pregnancy, because she truly didn't understand what she'd destroyed. I looked at her for a long time before answering. I need some time. That night I slept in the guest room. Around 1 a.m, I opened my phone and stared at nursery photos I'd saved over the past few weeks. Little bookshelves, rocking chairs, tiny baseball-themed blankets. At some point I realized I wasn't even crying anymore. I was just empty. And somewhere between midnight and sunrise, another thought finally hit me. The worst part wasn't losing the baby. It was realizing my wife never trusted me enough to face the decision with me in the first place. 3 days after the clinic, I packed 2 duffel bags, my laptop, and a week's worth of blood pressure medication, and moved into a Residence Inn off Central Expressway. I told Rachel I just needed space. Truth was, I couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. Every room felt haunted. The kitchen island where we used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. The hallway where we'd argued quietly after failed IVF appointments. The extra bedroom upstairs we kept pretending would someday matter. I checked into the hotel around 6 p.m. while some exhausted front desk clerk with a Cowboys lanyard apologized because the ice machine on the 3rd floor was broken. I remember nodding like that information mattered. That became my life for a while. Tiny, meaningless details floating around while my actual life collapsed underneath me. The room smelled faintly like bleach and old carpet. There was a little kitchenette nobody really used and one of those fake leather chairs that looked comfortable until you sat in it for more than 10 minutes. I spent the first night staring at ESPN with the sound off. Didn't watch a second of it. Just sat there in silence while Dallas traffic lights blinked outside the window. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed. Rachel. I let it ring. Then another text came through. We need to talk like adults. I actually laughed a little at that. Adults. After hiding something like that from your husband. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to a Whataburger near Richardson because I suddenly realized I hadn't eaten all day. The place was crowded with high school kids and construction workers winding down after shifts. I sat alone in my SUV in the parking lot, eating cold fries while watching families walk inside together. A grandfather held the door open for a little girl wearing cowboy boots. Some young dad carried a sleeping toddler on his shoulder. And there I was at 52 years old, sitting in a luxury SUV, worth more than my first house, eating a cheeseburger by myself, like a divorced insurance salesman. That's the thing nobody tells you about grief when you're older. It's quiet. There's no dramatic movie soundtrack, no collapse to your knees. Mostly it's just sitting alone in parking lots, wondering how your life became unrecognizable so fast. The next morning, my best friend Frank Delgado called me. You alive? He asked. More or less. I'm outside. Frank had been my friend for over 20 years. We met back when my software company was still operating out of a rented office above a tire shop in Garland. He owned a contracting business back then. Loud guy, bald, permanent coffee breath, the kind of man who insulted you as a form of affection. I opened the hotel room door and found him holding 2 coffees in a paper sack from McDonald's. You look terrible, he said immediately. Good morning to you too. I mean it, you look like somebody dug you up. He stepped inside without asking. Frank had been divorced twice and treated marriage counseling the way combat veterans talk about old wars. He sat at the little hotel table and slid an Egg McMuffin toward me. "You eating?" "Trying to." He studied me for a minute. Then he said quietly, "You gonna tell me what really happened?" So I did. Not all at once, pieces of it. The clinic call, the promotion, the pregnancy, the secret. Frank listened without interrupting, which honestly scared me more than if he'd yelled. When I finished, he leaned back slowly. "Jesus. Yeah." Then he asked the question I'd been avoiding myself. "You think this is the first time she's hidden something from you?" I looked away immediately. That answer came too fast. Frank noticed. "Oh, Danny." I rubbed both hands over my face. There were other pregnancies I admitted quietly, years ago, early ones. She said they ended naturally. "And now you're wondering." I nodded. The silence after that felt heavy. Finally, Frank sighed. "You know what your problem always was? I'm sure you'll tell me. You spent 15 years trying to make her life easier. That's called marriage." "No," he said. "Marriage is two people carrying weight together. You carried everything." At first I got defensive. Because Rachel did work hard. She wasn't lazy. She earned decent money too. But once Frank started listing things out loud, I realized how uneven things had become over the years. I paid the mortgage. I paid for the fertility treatments, the vacations, the BMW, the country club membership she barely used, the Cabo trips with her friends. Even most of the retirement accounts had come through my business investments. Meanwhile, Rachel kept climbing professionally while acting like my financial support was just expected, like oxygen in the room, something invisible. A few days later, I made the mistake of opening Facebook. Rachel had posted a photo from her office. Professional headshot, big smile. Caption: "Sometimes choosing yourself is the hardest but most necessary step toward growth." 700 likes. Comments full of, "Proud of you, strong women inspire people. You deserve happiness." I stared at that screen until my jaw tightened. Nobody knew what she'd done. And worse than that, nobody would believe it if I told them. Because Rachel was smart. She wasn't publicly attacking me. She was building a narrative. Independent woman. Emotionally exhausted marriage. Career sacrifice. Meanwhile, I became the invisible husband somewhere off screen. A problem people assumed existed. That realization changed something inside me. Not rage exactly. Clarity. A week later, I drove home close to midnight. I hadn't planned to. I think part of me still wanted her to stop me, to apologize, to tell me she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The house lights were on upstairs. I sat in the driveway for almost 10 minutes before going inside. Then I heard Rachel laughing. Soft, relaxed. Not the nervous crying from the clinic parking lot. Real laughter. I walked toward the living room quietly and stopped. She was on FaceTime in the kitchen. A man's voice came through the speakers. I couldn't hear every word. But I heard enough. "You deserve better than this situation," the guy said. Rachel smiled down at the phone in a way I hadn't seen in years. Warm, admiring. Young. I stood there maybe 3 seconds before turning around and walking back out. She never even knew I was there. I drove all the way to Lake Ray Hubbard that night with no destination in mind. Around 1 in the morning, I parked near the water and just sat there staring across the dark lake. Then I finally admitted something to myself. Maybe my marriage had been ending for a long time. I was just the last person to notice. Back at the hotel later that night, I opened my laptop and searched for the number of a divorce attorney Frank once recommended. My finger hovered over the call button for almost a full minute. Then I pressed it. Because for the first time in 15 years, I stopped trying to save my marriage and started trying to save myself. The first thing my divorce attorney asked me was whether I wanted an emotional divorce or a financial divorce. I remember blinking at him across this enormous mahogany desk in downtown Dallas while he adjusted his reading glasses like he'd asked me what kind of coffee I wanted. "What's the difference?" I said. "An emotional divorce costs you peace," he replied. "A financial divorce costs you money. Most men your age make the mistake of choosing both." His name was Leonard Briggs, late 60s, Navy veteran, the kind of attorney who spoke softly enough that people leaned in when he talked. Frank had warned me beforehand. Don't let the old man fool you, he said. Leonard could probably negotiate Satan into child support. I hired him that afternoon. Not because I wanted revenge. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Truth was, something inside me had changed after seeing Rachel laughing on that video call. The shock was fading. In its place came something colder. Awareness. Over the next couple weeks, my life became paperwork, legal meetings, and long, quiet nights at the hotel. I still went to work every day. That surprised me. You'd think a man falling apart would stop functioning. But honestly, routine became the only thing holding me together. I'd drive into our Plano office around 7 in the morning, nod at employees, sit through software integration meetings, and pretend my marriage wasn't collapsing in slow motion. Then I'd return to the hotel and stare at the ceiling until 2 in the morning. Some nights I almost called Rachel. Not because I forgave her, because I missed who I thought she used to be. That's the dangerous thing about long marriages. Your memory keeps editing reality to protect you. About 3 weeks into the separation, Leonard called me during lunch. You still share any cloud storage accounts with your wife? Technically, yes. Change your passwords. That got my attention immediately. Why? She's deleting financial records. I drove straight from the office to Leonard's building. When I got there, he slid printed documents across the desk toward me. Bank transfers. Hidden investment accounts. Large purchases I'd never seen before. Nothing catastrophic. Rachel wasn't stealing millions or anything dramatic like that. But she'd quietly opened separate accounts over the last 2 years and redirected bonuses there. Your wife's preparing for independence, Leonard said calmly. She makes $75,000 a year. She plans to make more. That sentence sat heavily in my chest. Because suddenly the timeline started making sense. The promotion? The secrecy. The emotional distance. This hadn't been panic. It had been planning. A few days later, things got worse. I was sitting in my hotel room reviewing company emails when I noticed unusual login activity on our shared family cloud account. Normally, I wouldn't have cared, but years in software security train your brain to notice patterns. The IP address came from a luxury hotel in downtown Dallas. The exact same weekend, Rachel told me she was attending a regional leadership seminar. I stared at the screen for a long time before clicking deeper. What I found wasn't explicit. No dramatic photos, no movie-level evidence. Just metadata. Shared document access. Late-night logins. Location overlaps. Enough for my stomach to drop anyway. I hired a private investigator the next morning. That part still bothers me a little. Not because it was wrong, because once you cross that line, your marriage is already dead whether you admit it or not. The investigator's name was Carla Ruiz, former Dallas PD official, emotionally detached in a way that honestly comforted me. She called 4 days later. There's a man, she said. I closed my eyes. Who? Kevin Hollis, senior VP at your wife's company. I recognized the name immediately. Rachel mentioned him constantly over the past year. Kevin thinks this. Kevin says corporate wants that. Kevin believes I'm leadership material. I used to joke that the guy lived in our kitchen. Suddenly, none of it sounded funny anymore. Carla continued carefully. I can't prove a full physical relationship yet, but there's enough contact outside work hours to raise serious concerns. What kind of contact? Private dinners, hotels, weekends overlapping with conferences. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat there in silence for almost 10 minutes. Not angry, just tired, deeply tired. That night I opened an old backup folder from our shared tablet account. Rachel had forgotten synced messages existed there. Most were harmless. Work talk, travel schedules, flirting. Then I found the thread that finally broke something inside me. Kevin, you sure you're ready to deal with him after the procedure? Rachel, Daniel will survive, he always does. Another message later that night. A baby right now would ruin everything we worked for. We, not she. Not I. We. My throat tightened so hard I had to stand up and walk into the bathroom. I gripped the sink with both hands while the room spun around me. The pain wasn't explosive. It was quieter than that. Like something heavy slowly collapsing inside your chest. At some point I realized I was breathing too fast. I turned on cold water and stood there in the dark hotel bathroom listening to it run while downtown traffic hummed faintly outside. All I could think was, how long have I been funding my own humiliation? The next day, Frank helped me move some personal items out of the house while Rachel was at work. Halfway through loading boxes into my truck, he pointed at the Peloton bike in the garage. That thing cost, what, 20 grand? Close enough, Frank snorted. $20,000 for a bike she never rode. That's your marriage right there. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. Not because it was funny, because sometimes men laugh right before they completely lose it. By then, Leonard had already started protecting my business assets and freezing unnecessary joint spending. Again, nothing illegal, nothing vindictive, just smart, controlled, adult. That bothered Rachel more than yelling ever could. She started texting more aggressively. You're punishing me now. I hope you're proud of yourself. You're becoming someone I don't recognize. That last one almost made me laugh, because I barely recognized her either. Then came the final discovery. Kevin Hollis was married. 22 years. 2 grown daughters. And according to Carla, his wife had absolutely no idea any of this was happening. That night, I sat alone outside the hotel beside one of those gas fire pits they install to make business travelers feel less depressed. A couple nearby drank wine and talked about retirement plans while airplanes crossed the night sky overhead. I remember staring into the flames thinking about secrets, how people think they control them, how they build entire lives around them. But secrets don't stay buried forever. They just wait for the right room to explode in. By the time October rolled around, I'd stopped checking Rachel's social media. That probably sounds small, but it mattered. For weeks, I'd been torturing myself with her carefully staged posts, leadership conferences, smiling office selfies, inspirational quotes about courage and growth. Every picture looked polished enough to belong in a pharmaceutical commercial. Meanwhile, I was eating takeout in a hotel room and learning how divorce attorneys bill by the hour. At some point, though, exhaustion replaced obsession. I stopped needing to know what she was doing every minute. That's when Leonard told me something interesting. Rachel's company was holding a regional executive dinner at a steakhouse in downtown Dallas. Quiet little celebration, promotions, expansion announcements, leadership networking, the kind of corporate gathering where everybody drinks expensive bourbon while pretending they're changing the world by selling medical supply logistics. Normally, I wouldn't have cared, except my software company handled a significant portion of their distribution tracking systems across Texas and Oklahoma. And 2 days earlier, Leonard had formally submitted evidence regarding Kevin Hollis to the company's compliance department. At the same time, Kevin's wife received a package from Carla. Hotel receipts, messages, travel records, nothing illegal. Just enough truth to burn several lives down at once. I remember asking Leonard, you sure this timing isn't too aggressive? He leaned back in his chair. Daniel, you're not detonating anything. You're simply refusing to keep protecting people who lied to you. That sentence stayed with me, because for months I'd still been acting like protecting Rachel was somehow my responsibility. Even after everything. The night of the dinner, I almost didn't go. Seriously. I sat in the hotel parking garage for 20 minutes debating whether I even wanted to witness whatever happened next. Revenge sounds satisfying in theory, but when you're actually close to it, there's this strange heaviness that creeps in. Like your soul already knows nobody really wins. Still around 7:30, I drove downtown. The steakhouse sat near the edge of the Arts District. Valet parking, big glass windows, men in sport coats talking too loudly near the entrance. I wore jeans, brown boots, and a navy blazer Frank convinced me to buy years earlier. You dress like a depressed accountant, he'd told me at the time. Turns out he was right. Inside the restaurant smelled like whiskey and grilled meat. Low lighting, piano music somewhere in the background. I spotted Rachel almost immediately. She stood near the center of the private dining area, holding a wine glass, laughing at something Kevin Hollis had said. For a moment, seeing her still hit me harder than I expected. 15 years together doesn't disappear overnight. Your body remembers someone long after your mind understands the truth. Rachel looked beautiful. Older than when we met, obviously, so was I, but confident, sharp, expensive dress, hair perfectly done, and completely comfortable standing beside another man while our marriage slowly bled out in court filings. I almost turned around right then. Then she looked up and saw me. The expression on her face changed instantly. Not guilt. Panic. Kevin turned next. He recognized me too. We'd met twice at company functions years earlier. I gave a small, polite nod and sat alone at the bar near the back. That's important. I didn't storm in. Didn't yell. Didn't make a scene. I ordered an old-fashioned and watched the Rangers game silently on the television above the bottles. About 15 minutes later, the room shifted. You could feel it before anything actually happened. Phones buzzing. Whispers. People checking emails. One woman from HR stood up abruptly and walked toward the hallway with her phone pressed tightly against her ear. Kevin's smile started fading. Rachel looked confused. Then the front doors opened again. Kevin's wife walked in. I'd seen her photo before. Susan Hollis, mid-60s, elegant in a quiet way, silver necklace, dark green blouse. She wasn't screaming. Honestly, that made it worse. The entire private dining room went dead silent as she walked directly toward their table. Kevin stood halfway. Susan. She dropped a thick envelope in front of him. I spent 22 years defending you, she said calmly. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Rachel looked pale enough to collapse. Kevin lowered his voice immediately. Not here. Susan actually laughed once. Where exactly would you prefer your humiliation, Kevin? A few executives quietly started leaving the room. Others stayed frozen in place, pretending not to stare. Then Rachel's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face completely drained of color. HR. I knew immediately. A minute later, another executive approached Kevin privately near the hallway. The conversation looked tense. Sharp gestures, tight expressions. The compliance investigation had moved faster than expected. And underneath all of it sat the other problem. My company. 3 weeks earlier, Leonard had formally notified their legal department that we would not renew our logistics software contract due to ethical concerns involving executive conduct and liability exposure. Losing us wouldn't destroy the company, but it would absolutely create chaos internally, especially during expansion season. Rachel suddenly walked toward me across the restaurant. Fast. Her heels hit the floor hard enough that people turned to watch. You did this, she whispered. I looked up calmly. No, I stopped covering for it. You went after my job. I protected my business. Her eyes filled instantly. You wanted to humiliate me. That one hurt more than I expected. Because part of me probably did. Not publicly. Not cruelly. But after months of feeling invisible and disposable, yeah, maybe some wounded part of me wanted her to finally feel consequences too. I set my drink down carefully. You made your choices, Rachel. So did you. We stared at each other for several seconds. Then from across the room, somebody raised their voice near Kevin. The whole dinner had officially collapsed. Executives leaving. Staff whispering. One poor waiter standing completely frozen beside a tray of steaks like he'd wandered into the wrong movie. Rachel suddenly looked exhausted. Not angry anymore. Just defeated. And for one dangerous second, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the nursery paint samples. I remembered the clinic call. I remembered sitting alone in parking lots wondering why my life suddenly felt empty. And the sympathy disappeared. I stood up slowly. I'm done here. Outside, the Dallas air felt cool for once. Wind moving between buildings. Traffic humming through downtown. I was halfway to my truck when Rachel followed me into the parking garage. Daniel. I kept walking. Daniel, please. Something in her voice finally stopped me. Not manipulation. Not performance. Actual fear. I turned around. Mascara streaked slightly under her eyes, hair loosened by the wind. For the first time in months, she looked human again, instead of polished. You destroyed my life, she said quietly. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I answered as honestly as I could. No, Rachel. My voice came out tired more than angry. You destroyed us the day you made that decision without me. She started crying then. Real crying. And the strangest part, it didn't make me feel victorious. Just sad. I got into my truck and sat there gripping the steering wheel while downtown lights blurred across the windshield. My hands were shaking. Not from rage. From grief. Because revenge, even when deserved, doesn't give you back the life you thought you were going to have. 6 months after the divorce finalized, I bought a small lake house outside Granbury. Not a mansion. Not one of those giant waterfront places owned by retired oil executives with 3 boats and outdoor kitchens bigger than my first apartment. Just a simple one-story house with a wooden dock, an old smoker grill, and enough quiet to hear myself think again. That mattered more than I expected. For a while after everything ended, silence scared me. I'd spent 15 years organizing my life around another person's routines, her meetings, her moods, her ambitions. Even the sound of Rachel blow-drying her hair in the mornings had become part of the structure of my life. Then suddenly there was nothing. No footsteps upstairs. No television running in the other room. No tense little conversations pretending everything was normal. Just me. At first that loneliness felt unbearable. Then slowly as it became peaceful. Not every day. Healing's messier than people admit, especially when you're older. Young people talk about moving on like grief's a light switch. At 52, you know better. Some mornings I still woke up angry. Some nights I still sat on the back porch wondering whether I'd missed signs years earlier. Whether I'd buried myself in work too often. Whether Rachel and I could have saved things if we'd been more honest before resentment hardened into distance. You replay everything after a marriage dies. Every conversation. Every silence. Every moment you chose comfort over truth. But life kept moving anyway. That first winter in Granbury, I learned how to cook properly for one person without feeling pathetic about it. I started fishing again for the first time since my 30s. I even joined a small support group in Fort Worth for men dealing with divorce and family loss. Frank called it Sadness Club. Then he drove me there himself. The group met Tuesday nights inside a church gymnasium that smelled faintly like burnt coffee and old basketballs. Mostly older men, veterans, retired cops, a widower whose wife died from pancreatic cancer, one guy who lost custody of his kids after a brutal divorce. Nobody tried to sound wise. That's what I liked about it. Men our age don't always need advice. Sometimes we just need a room where nobody expects us to pretend we're fine. One night, a younger guy named Eric shared how his wife left him after their son died in a car accident. Halfway through talking, he broke down completely. Just buried his face in both hands. The old version of me probably would have looked away to give him privacy. Instead, I stayed seated beside him until he finished. After the meeting, he asked quietly, "How'd you survive losing your family?" I almost told him I hadn't. Then I thought about the lake house, the mornings on the dock, Frank showing up randomly with beer and brisket, the fact that I'd gone almost 3 weeks recently without checking Rachel's LinkedIn page. Small victories. I survived one day at a time, I finally said. And for the first time in a long while, I realized it was true. Rachel and I spoke only twice after the divorce finalized. Both conversations were about paperwork. No screaming. No dramatic reconciliation attempts. Just 2 tired people finishing what was left of a broken marriage. I heard through mutual friends that Kevin Hollis quietly resigned 3 months after the investigation. Rachel kept her job technically, but the promotion disappeared. She transferred departments eventually. Fewer leadership responsibilities, less visibility. Frank expected me to celebrate hearing that. Instead, I just nodded. It doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. I admitted one afternoon while we sat outside my place watching rain move across the lake. Frank sipped his beer slowly. "Yeah," he said, "that's because you're not actually a vengeful guy." Maybe he was right. Or maybe eventually grief simply exhausts your ability to hate. One foggy morning in early spring, I finally opened the box I'd been avoiding for months. The baby box. I'd packed it myself during the divorce. Inside was a tiny pair of blue sneakers I bought online after Rachel first got pregnant, still wrapped in tissue paper. There was also an ultrasound photo and an old handwritten note Rachel once left me after a failed IVF cycle years ago. "Someday, we'll get our miracle." I sat there on my kitchen table staring at her handwriting while sunlight slowly pushed through the fog outside. And for the first time since the clinic call, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears from a man finally allowing himself to mourn something he never truly faced. The child, not the marriage, not the betrayal, the child. That afternoon, I carried the box down to the lake. The water was calm, gray sky overhead, a few birds skimming low across the surface. Near the dock sat an old wooden bench facing the shoreline. I placed the box there carefully, not throwing it away, not trying to erase it, just letting it rest somewhere outside my chest for once. Then I sat beside it for a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. You know, when you're younger, you think strength means endurance. You think being a good husband means sacrificing quietly no matter what it costs you. But somewhere along the line, I confused loyalty with self-erasure. That was my mistake. I spent years trying to become the kind of man who could hold a family together through anything. I worked harder, earned more, became more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. And maybe some of that mattered. But not if it came at the cost of abandoning myself. That's the part nobody teaches men my age. You can love someone deeply and still lose yourself trying to save them. Sometimes dignity means walking away before there's nothing left of you. I still think about the baby sometimes. Probably always will. Certain things don't leave you completely. But these days when I sit on that dock at sunset watching the light fade across the water, I don't feel broken anymore. Just older. Wiser maybe. A little lonelier than I once imagined I'd be. But finally honest with myself. And honestly, that's still a better life than living beside someone who stopped choosing you a long time ago. If this story meant something to you, thanks for listening. And if you're rebuilding your life later than you expected, just know it's not too late. Not for peace, not for dignity, not for starting over.